EVO. Welcome back to The Devil Within. This is part 2 of The Wrong Road. Chapter 4. The Trailer. Sometimes the forest offers illusions, mirages that look like salvation when you're too exhausted to question whether salvation wants anything from you. By the time snow melted and search teams could return without risking their own lives, the mountain had changed its expression. Branches loosened, creeks ran again, patches of earth emerged like old wounds resurfacing. And where winter had muffled sound and movement, spring began quietly returning them. Months after the Montego had been found, a group of searchers followed a barely used service road deeper than anyone believed the Yuba County Five could have reasonably walked. The road twisted like a thought that refused to stay straight. It dropped into valleys and climbed back into ridges, all of it surrounded by a forest that had grown used to keeping secrets. And then, through the trees, a shape appeared. It wasn't a cabin, it wasn't a home. It was a U.S. Forest Service trailer, one of those small, unassuming structures meant to be used by rangers during seasonal operations. Its siding was weather-worn, its windows were dark. To a stranger, it might have looked like a shed someone forgot to take down. But to someone lost in winter, it would have looked like a damn miracle. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled stale, like metal and dust and something that used to be warm once. There were bunk beds, blankets, a fireplace, shelves, a locker stocked with food, canned rations still sealed, boxes of dehydrated meals, enough calories to sustain multiple men for weeks. On a table there were matches, nearby, propane. And in the back room, wrapped carefully in sheets, lay the remains of Ted Weiher. He had survived, not for hours, but likely for weeks. His beard had grown long, his weight had dropped significantly to the point where his body had begun devouring itself. There were small cuts on his feet from walking barefoot, likely to dry his socks, a desperate and tragic attempt to maintain some semblance of order. Some food had been eaten, but not most. The storeroom had remained locked. It could have been opened easily with a kick, a shove, a rock through the glass. But it wasn't. The matches had barely been used. The propane was untouched. The fireplace was cold. Everything that could have offered warmth, survival, and hope was right there, and yet somehow felt inaccessible. And this is the moment, the second anchor moment in the series, when investigators realized the question was no longer simply, how did they get here? The question became, why did they not do the things that would have saved them? And here, the devil within becomes clearer. The men had grown up relying on rules, structure, and limits. You don't break into what isn't yours. You don't take what you're not told you can take. You don't force doors or steal food or break windows because those things are wrong. In civilization, those lessons keep us safe. In winter wilderness, those lessons can kill us. Fear, confusion, cognitive rigidity, the brain narrowing instead of expanding, that becomes its own form of prison. Ted may have believed someone would come back. He may have believed he would get in trouble if he damaged government property. He may have believed staying still was obedience, and obedience would bring rescue. Obedience this time brought death. Now, it's easy from the comfort of distance to ask, why didn't he just do this or why didn't he just do that? But our minds behave differently when reality collapses. The trailer didn't fail Ted. His brain, terrified and loyal to rules that no longer applied, did. And the forest outside remained silent, listening, waiting, accepting the life offered to it without judgment. Winter had taken the others where they fell. Here, it simply finished what fear had started. Chapter 5. Theories, Ghost Stories, and the Need for Villains. Humans hate unfinished narratives. We would rather believe in outlandish conspiracies than accept that sometimes chaos wears the face of ordinary life. So when the facts surrounding the Yuba County Five refused to settle into something easily digestible, imagination rushed in like floodwater. There were whispers of men lurking in the trees, of strangers who forced them up the mountain, of criminal gangs, of vengeful hermits, of shadowy figures who chased them away from safety. Over time, the case was grafted into folklore. People began calling it America's Dyatlov Pass. The label did something psychologically clever and dangerous. It removed the responsibility from human vulnerability and projected it onto mystery. It turned the forest into a malicious entity. It invented enemies to blame. And why? Because the alternative is unbearable. 5 men, frightened and confused, lost their lives not to evil, but to the limits of human cognition. Investigators examined every version they could. Could someone have threatened them? Possibly, but there was no evidence. Could they have stumbled into a criminal operation? Unlikely. The area was far too remote. Could someone have lured them intentionally? The timeline would strain to hold on to that narrative. What did remain consistent were the patterns. They walked away from shelter. They avoided breaking into storage. They didn't seek help the way survival manuals suggest. Their decisions align with fear-driven impairment, not coercion. And slowly, reluctantly, the sensational explanations collapsed, one by one, under the weight of reality. And this is where my poetic thread deepens. Robert Frost wrote about choosing the road less traveled, and we've spent our whole lives misunderstanding that line. We turned it into a celebration of independence and courage and adventure. But in truth, the poem's about memory and regret and the way we rewrite our past to make it sound meaningful. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. A sigh, as in I'm going to lie to myself later to survive how this actually felt. The Yuba County Five didn't stand at a fork in the road and bravely choose the lesser path. They were lost. They were scared. Their options didn't feel like choices. And as night deepened, as cold entered muscle and bone, as the world shrank into a tunnel of confusion, the brain did what frightened brains do. It simplified the story. Don't turn back. Forward is the only way. Just keep going. And that voice, internal, convincing, and relentless, became the ultimate devil within. Not murder, not malice, just fear mistaken for certainty. Folklore offers monsters because monsters feel conquerable. But confusion? Confusion reminds us that the distance between survival and tragedy may be nothing more than a single, unquestioned thought. And there's nothing cinematic about that. There's only grief, scattered across a mountainside that's utterly incapable of caring who walks across it next. Chapter 6. The Miles We Never Take. By the time investigators closed their files, not with satisfaction but with exhaustion, the story of the Yuba County Five no longer felt like a puzzle. It felt like a warning. Families kept photographs, they told stories, they argued gently, sometimes fiercely, with the implications of the official conclusions. Because how do you love someone, lose someone, and then say out loud, they didn't deserve this, but they weren't killed, they were just overwhelmed. Grief resists nuance, but the mountain never had nuance to begin with. Exposure does its work slowly. First comes shivering, teeth rattling uncontrollably. Then comes fatigue. Thought becomes sluggish. Memory flickers. Muscles fail. Eventually the brain, starving and freezing, begins lying to you. Warmth hallucinations, sudden calm, a sense that sleep is the best idea you've ever had. And there's Frost again, and miles to go before I sleep. For the Yuba County Five, there were miles, literal miles, that they needed to travel downhill to survive, and they never took them. The tragedy lies in that gap, the distance between where they were and where salvation waited, a distance made impossible not by geography, but by fear. So what do we do with a story like this? We remember them, not as curiosities, not as legends, not as ingredients for unsolved mystery shows. We remember them as human beings, caught in a convergence of factors beyond their emotional and cognitive capacity to navigate. Winter, darkness, isolation, confusion, and a brain built for structure confronted with chaos. The devil within here wasn't demonic. It was the quiet, internal voice that convinced 5 men that forward meant safe, that obedience meant survival, that rules still applied in a place where rules had gone to die. Most horror stories end with a revelation. This one ends with humility. We are all far more fragile than we pretend. We tell ourselves we would push the car free. We would break into the pantry. We would light the fire. We would walk downhill. We would choose the right road. And maybe we would. Or maybe, in the right storm, on the wrong road, with fear whispering in our skulls and winter pressing its cold hand across our shoulders, we wouldn't. And that's the true horror here. Not killers, not curses, not ghosts, just the vast, indifferent landscape and the terrible realization that sometimes the most dangerous thing waiting for us out there is our own mind. In both Stopping by Woods and The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost's travelers keep moving, not because the woods are unsafe, but because life demands return. There are promises to keep, responsibilities, people waiting. The Yuba County 5 had promises too, games to play and families to hug, lives to live. Winter interrupted those promises, and fear made the interruption permanent. Unsolved doesn't always mean mysterious. Sometimes it just means unbearably human. May we remember them gently. May we carry compassion into the stories we tell. And may we never forget how thin the line really is between confidence and confusion, between the road that leads us home and the one that leads us quietly into the dark. Thanks for listening to The Devil Within. Follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a rating and review. It truly helps new listeners discover the show. And share the series with someone who values thoughtful storytelling. Email your thoughts or reactions or your own personal experiences to info@evocreative.com and go to our website, evocreative.com, to explore everything we're building at the network. And if life ever feels overwhelming, if fear narrows your world until you can't see a way back, please reach out. No one should have to navigate the dark alone. We'll be back soon, inside The Devil Within. And don't forget to check the show notes for great deals from the great companies that still support long-form storytelling. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm your writer and host, Brandon Morgan.